Tonight, we journey into the light of wisdom that emerged from the heart of the Islamic world, a tradition that transformed how humanity understands the harmony between reason and revelation. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, especially if you enjoy these philosophical journeys into the depths of human understanding. Now, dim the lights, perhaps light a candle, and let's ease into tonight's philosophical journey together. In 9th century Baghdad, scholars gathered around the House of Wisdom, witnessing a translation movement that revealed a new horizon of thought. Picture this magnificent city, Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphate, where the very air seemed to shimmer with intellectual possibility. Caliph Harun al-Rashid had established this grand library in the late 8th century, and his son al-Mamun transformed it into something unprecedented, a public academy where knowledge knew no borders. Here, ancient Greek texts met Persian poetry, while Indian mathematics conversed with Syriac philosophy. The House of Wisdom, or Bait al-Hikmah, became more than a repository of books. It was a living, breathing organism where scholars from across the known world would gather daily for translation, dialogue, and discovery. These weren't merely copying texts. They were engaging in the profound work of cultural alchemy, transforming wisdom from one civilization into another. And so, we can gently turn our attention to the deeper revelation this scene offers us. The Islamic Golden Age wasn't born from isolation, but from an extraordinary moment when cultures chose curiosity over fear. The Abbasid caliphs understood something profound, that truth expands when minds meet across the boundaries of language, religion, and tradition. Think of al-Kindi, wrestling with Aristotle's concepts while drawing on his own Arabic heritage. Consider how al-Jahiz might have explored human nature through both Islamic teachings and the empirical observations of his time. This wasn't assimilation, it was synthesis. The translators didn't simply render Greek philosophy into Arabic, they engaged with it, questioned it, and ultimately created something new. They were practicing what we might now call epistemic humility, the wisdom of knowing that no single culture holds a monopoly on truth. Let that thought rest with you as we consider how this mirrors our own search for meaning across cultures. Today, as global information flows faster than ever before, we find ourselves in our own translation movement, not of books, but of ideas, values, and ways of being. Social media connects us instantaneously across continents, yet we sometimes feel more divided than ever. The ancient lesson from Baghdad whispers to us, true understanding emerges not from the certainty of staying within our comfort zones, but from the courage to venture into the marketplace of ideas with genuine curiosity. When you engage with someone whose worldview differs from yours, you have an opportunity to practice the same epistemic humility that animated those medieval scholars. You might discover that your own beliefs become clearer, more refined, when viewed through the lens of another tradition. The insight revealed tonight is simple yet profound. Truth expands when cultures exchange ideas with genuine curiosity and respect. Just as those scholars in Baghdad transformed isolated knowledge into collective wisdom, we too can participate in this timeless human project of understanding. As we prepare to journey deeper into Islamic philosophy's remarkable contributions, carry with you this foundational understanding that wisdom emerges not from the fortress of certainty, but from the bridge of sincere dialogue. And now, let your mind settle into peaceful reflection on this dawn of inquiry we share. In 9th century Kufa, a city nestled along the banks of the Euphrates, a young man from an aristocratic Arab family began asking questions that would reshape the intellectual landscape of an entire civilization. His name was Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, and he would come to be known as the father of Arab philosophy. born around 801 into the noble Kinda tribe. Descended from chieftains who had walked among the companions of the prophet, al-Kindi carried within him both the weight of tradition and an insatiable hunger for knowledge. And tonight, we shall walk alongside this remarkable thinker as he faced a question that still echoes through the corridors of human thought. Can the light of reason illuminate the same truths as divine revelation, or must they forever remain separate flames? After receiving his early education in Kufa and later in Basra, where his father served as governor, al-Kindi journeyed to Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate. There, under the patronage of Caliph al-Ma'mun, he entered a place that would become legendary, the House of Wisdom, or Bait al-Hikmah. Picture this institution in your mind, a grand library where Arab, Persian, and scholars from across the known world gathered daily for translation, reading, and dialogue. Texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources flowed into this center like tributaries, feeding a great river of knowledge. Al-Kindi was appointed to oversee the translation of Greek scientific and philosophical texts into Arabic, and through this sacred work he encountered what Muslim scholars called the philosophy of the ancients, the profound teachings of Aristotle, Plato, and the Neoplatonists. Yet rather than seeing these foreign ideas as threats to his faith, al-Kindi perceived something extraordinary, the possibility of harmony. The central theme underpinning al-Kindi's philosophical writings became this very compatibility between philosophy and orthodox Islamic theology. He argued that truth, wherever it is found, belongs ultimately to the same source. Whether discovered through the careful reasoning of Greek philosophers or revealed through prophetic scripture, truth cannot contradict itself. Reason, in al-Kindi's vision, was not an opponent of faith, but rather its faithful servant, a lamp that illuminates the same chamber from a different angle. Consider how this insight speaks to our modern condition. Today, we often hear voices insisting that science and spirituality must occupy separate worlds, that rational inquiry somehow diminishes the sacred. Yet al-Kindi showed us, over 1,000 years ago, that this division is false. He demonstrated that intellectual curiosity and spiritual devotion can walk hand in hand, each enriching the other like two streams joining to form a mightier river. Yet al-Kindi's life was not merely one of peaceful contemplation. The political winds of the caliphate shifted like desert sands, while he flourished under al-Ma'mun and al-Mutasim, who appointed him tutor to the caliph's own son. His fortunes changed dramatically under later rulers. When al-Mutawakkil took power, al-Kindi faced persecution. At one point, this gentle scholar was beaten, and his precious library was confiscated. The very knowledge he had spent a lifetime gathering was torn from his hands. And yet, in the face of such adversity, al-Kindi continued his work, writing hundreds of treatises on subjects ranging from metaphysics and ethics to mathematics and medicine. His courage reminds us that the pursuit of wisdom often requires not just intellectual strength, but moral fortitude, the willingness to protect what we know to be true, even when the world turns hostile. And so, as we let these reflections settle like dust after a long journey, consider what al-Kindi's example offers you tonight. Perhaps you too have felt the tension between different sources of meaning in your life, between what reason suggests and what your heart believes, between the findings of science and the teachings of tradition. Al-Kindi invites us to approach this tension not with anxiety, but with patient curiosity. Use rational reflection, he whispers across the centuries, not to diminish your deepest values, but to understand them more fully. Let your questions be companions to your faith, not adversaries. In the end, the father of Arab philosophy died in 873, reportedly a lonely man in Baghdad, yet his legacy endures in every soul who dares to believe that wisdom has many paths, and that all true paths lead toward the same light. Rest now in that gentle assurance, as we prepare to continue our journey deeper into the golden age of Islamic thought. Picture, if you will, the grand city of Baghdad in the 8th and 9th centuries. Along the banks of the Tigris River, where ancient trade routes converged, a remarkable transformation was taking place. The Abbasid Caliphate had created something unprecedented, a city where scholars from across the known world came together, not just to trade in goods, but to trade in ideas. Under the enlightened patronage of caliphs like Harun al-Rashid and later al-Ma'mun, Baghdad became the beating heart of an intellectual renaissance that would reshape human understanding for centuries to come. At the center of this flourishing stood the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah, a name that perfectly captured its essence as a storehouse of wisdom. Here, translators worked tirelessly to render the philosophical treasures of ancient Greece, the mathematical insights of Persia, and the astronomical knowledge of India into Arabic. Men like al-Kindi, al-Jahiz, and countless others engaged in daily dialogue, debate, and discovery. But this wasn't merely the translation of texts. It was the translation of entire ways of thinking, the gradual creation of a new intellectual synthesis that would come to define Islamic philosophy. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. In these libraries, observatories, and debate halls, something profound was happening. Environment was literally shaping intellect. The caliphs understood that knowledge flourishes when supported by social infrastructure, when scholars have access to books, when their work is valued by those in power, when learning becomes a shared cultural purpose rather than an isolated individual pursuit. The translation movement wasn't just about preserving ancient wisdom, it was about creating conditions where new wisdom could emerge through collaboration and dialogue. As we observe this historical moment from our modern vantage point, we can recognize how remarkably relevant it remains. In our rapidly shifting economic landscapes, where entire industries can be transformed seemingly overnight, the question of how to nurture intellectual flourishing takes on new urgency. The Islamic Golden Age reminds us that great thinking rarely happens in isolation. It requires communities of practice, institutions that value inquiry, and social structures that make intellectual work not just possible, but purposeful. And so, perhaps we can take inspiration from this moment in Baghdad's Golden Age. We might not be able to rebuild the House of Wisdom in our own time, but we can create smaller spaces of learning in our daily lives. A corner of our home dedicated to thoughtful reading, online communities that value depth over speed, or simply the habit of engaging in genuine dialogue with those around us. For in these small acts of intellectual hospitality, we honor the great tradition of scholars who understood that wisdom grows best when it is cultivated together, in the light of shared curiosity and mutual respect. When al-Farabi imagined the virtuous city, he showed how political structures shape the human soul. This profound insight emerged from the mind of Abu Nasr Muhammad al-Farabi, who lived in the 9th and 10th centuries and earned the title Father of Islamic Neoplatonism and Founder of Islamic Political Philosophy. Al-Farabi, whom later philosophers would call the second master, with Aristotle being the first, spent much of his scholarly life in Baghdad among Syriac Christian scholars, engaging in deep philosophical dialogue that transcended religious boundaries. His vision of the ideal city was not merely a political treatise, but a profound meditation on how the organization of society directly influences the moral development of every citizen. His philosophical scene presents a ruler guided by wisdom instead of power. In al-Farabi's vision, the ideal ruler, what he calls the virtuous ruler, is not one who wields authority through force or fear, but one who embodies philosophical wisdom and moral excellence. This ruler having achieved harmony between reason and virtue, guides the city toward its highest purpose, the cultivation of human flourishing through the cultivation of virtue. The citizens themselves, living in such an environment, naturally develop noble character traits because the very structure of their society reinforces ethical behavior and rational living. The insight is that society and virtue are deeply intertwined. Al-Farabi understood that virtue cannot flourish in a vacuum. It requires the right conditions, the proper environment, and wise guidance. His virtuous city functions like a great educational institution where every law, every institution, every custom serves to nurture the human capacity for reason and goodness. This stands in stark contrast to what he called the ignorant cities, where people are led by their appetites and passions, or the vicious cities, where rulers pursue power at the expense of their subjects' moral development. Modern politics often frays our sense of unity, making Farabi's ideal relevant. In our contemporary world, where political discourse seems increasingly fragmented and divisive, al-Farabi's vision offers a profound alternative. Instead of viewing politics as a battleground for competing interests, he presents it as a collaborative endeavor in human flourishing. The political arena becomes a space where wisdom is cultivated, where virtue is rewarded, and where the common good transcends individual desires. This ancient wisdom speaks directly to our modern challenges of polarization and social discord. We can apply this wisdom by cultivating virtue in our communities through empathy and clarity. As we rest in this insight, let us remember that true political change begins with personal transformation, becoming the kind of wise, virtuous individuals who can create the kinds of communities al-Farabi envisioned. And so, in our peaceful contemplation, we carry forward this vision of harmony between individual virtue and collective flourishing. In 10th century Bukhara, a young Avicenna healed a prince, gaining access to the royal library that would transform his world. The moment shows a prodigy, shaped by crisis and opportunity. His insight was the idea that knowledge emerges through disciplined reason. Today, our overwhelming access to information mirrors his vast library. Viewers can apply his method by seeking depth instead of speed in learning. In the great city of Bukhara, then the jewel of the Samanid Empire and center of Persian learning, stood a young man whose mind would reshape how humanity thinks about knowledge itself. Muhammad ibn Sina, later known to the world as Avicenna, was barely into his teens when fate presented him with an extraordinary opportunity. When illness struck the local ruler's son, the prince's condition had baffled the physicians of this prestigious city, which had served as a center of scholarship for over a millennium, where new Persian culture flourished under the Samanid dynasty. Young Avicenna approached this medical challenge with what would become his signature method: systematic observation, logical deduction, and relentless questioning of assumptions. When his treatment proved successful, the grateful father granted him something invaluable: access to the royal library. This wasn't merely a collection of books. It was a gateway to the accumulated wisdom of civilizations, containing works in Arabic, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit, and other languages of learning. Here was a young man who would spend his days reading philosophical treatises and his nights composing original works, developing a method that would influence human thought for over a millennium. What fascinates us today is not just his prodigious intellect, but his approach to knowledge itself. Avicenna understood that wisdom isn't about accumulating facts like coins in a purse, but about developing disciplined ways of thinking that can illuminate reality. In our age of infinite scroll and constant distraction, we face a challenge remarkably similar to what Avicenna encountered in that vast library: the problem of too much information, yet too little true understanding. Our smartphones hold more information than the entire Samanid royal collection, yet we often feel less wise, less grounded, more scattered than this 10th century scholar working by candlelight. Avicenna's method offers us a gentle medicine for our digital fever. Instead of consuming information at the speed of our dopamine-craving minds, he would have us slow down, ask better questions, and follow the thread of inquiry wherever it leads, no matter how long the journey takes. His method was methodical. Identify a question worth pursuing, gather relevant knowledge systematically, examine it critically through reason, and then synthesize insights into coherent understanding. This wasn't just academic exercise, it was a way of living consciously in a world of overwhelming stimuli. What makes Avicenna's approach particularly relevant today is his understanding that knowledge and wisdom serve different functions in human life. Information tells us what is, knowledge helps us understand how things work, but wisdom guides us toward what matters and how we should live. In our current moment of global uncertainty, political polarization, and technological disruption, we desperately need more than data. We need the kind of disciplined thinking that can help us navigate complexity with clarity and compassion. Avicenna's method teaches us to resist the temptation of quick answers, and instead cultivate the patience to sit with difficult questions, to follow arguments to their logical conclusions, and to remain humble before the vast mystery of existence. This is the kind of thinking that can help us build bridges across divides, solve problems thoughtfully, and create institutions that serve human flourishing rather than just generating more information. Tonight, as we consider Avicenna's rise from young healer to philosophical giant, we can practice his method in our own lives. When we encounter a complex problem, whether it's understanding a global crisis, navigating a relationship, or choosing a career path, we can pause and ask ourselves, what does disciplined reason reveal here? What assumptions need questioning? What might I be missing? The royal library of our age isn't restricted to princes and scholars. It's available to each of us through our devices, our libraries, our conversations with others. But unlike young Avicenna, we don't just need access to knowledge. We need the wisdom to use it well. As we drift towards sleep, let us carry this thought forward. That true learning isn't about how much we can consume, but about how deeply we can understand, how carefully we can think, and how wisely we can live. The light of wisdom, like the libraries of Bukhara, remains open to all who approach it with patience and purpose. In medieval courts and mosques, theologians of Kalam debated free will, divine justice, and causality. This scene reveals how disagreement sharpened clarity. The insight is that intellectual conflict can refine truth rather than destroy it. Picture, if you will, the intellectual salons of 9th century Baghdad, where scholars gathered not merely to exchange pleasantries, but to grapple with the most fundamental questions of existence. Here, the Mu'tazilites, those masters of rational theology, engaged in passionate discourse with their opponents from the Ahl al-Hadith tradition, particularly the Hanbalites. Their debates were not mere academic exercises, but profound explorations of how we understand divine justice, human responsibility, and the very nature of causality itself. Consider the central controversy that animated these discussions, the nature of free will versus divine predestination. The Mu'tazilites, with their rationalist approach, insisted that humans possess genuine free will and are morally responsible for their actions. They argued that divine justice requires this fundamental autonomy. How could God hold us accountable for acts we had no choice but to commit? Their opponents, however, worried that this position compromised God's absolute sovereignty. These were not trivial disagreements, but profound explorations of the relationship between divine omnipotence and human moral agency. The famous Mihna, or Inquisition, instituted by Caliph al-Ma'mun in 833 CE, attempted to enforce Mu'tazilite doctrine across the Islamic world. Yet even this political intervention could not resolve the deeper philosophical tensions. Instead, it revealed how these debates touched the very heart of Islamic theological understanding. And yet, here's what makes these medieval debates so remarkably relevant to our contemporary moment. They demonstrate that intellectual disagreement can serve as a catalyst for deeper understanding rather than a destructive force. The Mu'tazilites' insistence on using reason to interpret revelation, their willingness to consider metaphorical interpretations when literal readings conflicted with rational principles, and their opponents' steadfast commitment to textual fidelity. All of these positions, in their tension and dialogue, refined Islamic theological discourse for generations. In today's polarized world, where social media often amplifies our worst impulses toward absolutism, these medieval debates offer a profound lesson. They show us that the most productive conversations often begin not with the assumption that our opponent is wrong, but with the recognition that their perspective might contain insights we have yet to consider. The goal was not victory, but understanding. Not the silencing of opposition, but the sharpening of wisdom through thoughtful engagement. What if you existed without senses or memory? Avicenna's flying man challenges everything we believe about the self. The scenario explores consciousness independent of physical experience. Its insight is that human awareness has a core deeper than bodily sensation. Modern debates in psychology and AI echo this question of selfhood. The great physician-philosopher Avicenna, known as Ibn Sina, who lived during the Islamic Golden Age around 980 to 1037, crafted this remarkable thought experiment in his influential work, The Book of Healing. Imagine, he asks, a man who has been created perfectly formed, yet floating in space, completely isolated from any physical contact, unable to see or hear, taste or touch. Strip away all sensory input, all memory of previous experiences, all connection to the physical world. The question becomes, would this being still possess awareness of its own existence? Avicenna's answer is profound and revolutionary. This floating consciousness would indeed know itself to exist, not through external validation or sensory confirmation, but through an immediate, direct awareness that requires no proof. I think, therefore I am, Descartes would later declare, but Avicenna had already uncovered something even more fundamental. That being conscious of one's own consciousness transcends the need for physical validation entirely. This insight reveals that our sense of self, our awareness of existing, emerges from something deeper than the accumulated experiences of sight, sound, touch, and memory. The self, in Avicenna's understanding, is not simply the sum of our experiences, but rather the underlying awareness that makes all experience possible. This ancient philosophical insight resonates remarkably with contemporary discussions in psychology and artificial intelligence. Modern research is wrestling with questions of consciousness. How do we know an AI truly experiences awareness versus merely simulating responses? Find themselves exploring territory Avicenna mapped centuries ago. When neuroscientists investigate the hard problem of consciousness, why and how physical processes give rise to subjective experience, they encounter the same mystery Avicenna contemplated. What is the essential nature of awareness itself? The flying man reminds us that questions of selfhood and consciousness may require us to look beyond the material towards something more fundamental about the nature of being. In our daily lives, we can explore this insight through quiet reflection and contemplative stillness. When we step back from the constant stream of sensory input and mental chatter, when we allow ourselves to rest in pure awareness without needing to categorize or analyze, we might catch glimpses of this deeper self. The the consciousness that observes our thoughts and experiences rather than being identical to them. In moments of meditation, in the space between sleep and waking, in the quiet after deep concentration, we can perhaps recognize that awareness itself, that inner witness that notices everything we experience, remains constant and unchanged, regardless of what passes through it. Avicenna's Flying Man invites us to discover within ourselves this essential, incorporeal awareness that knows its own existence without need of proof. Avicenna proposed a being whose existence is necessary, revealing a new framework for understanding reality. The moment presents a metaphysical system where contingency finds its source. The insight is the distinction between things that might exist and what must exist. In today's uncertain world, this invites grounding in stable values. Viewers can reflect on what is truly necessary in their own lives. In his profound Proof of the Truthful, the philosopher Ibn Sina made a subtle yet revolutionary distinction. Consider everything around you, the chair you're sitting on, the thoughts in your mind, even the most stable institutions. Each of these, he observed, exists only because something else makes it possible. They are contingent beings, depending on causes outside themselves for their continued existence. But could we imagine a being whose existence doesn't depend on anything else? A being whose essence is so perfect, so complete, that non-existence would be impossible for it. This was Avicenna's insight, that within the realm of existence itself, there must be something that simply is, without qualification, without dependence. Picture, if you will, the vast ocean of existence, where each wave represents a contingent thing, arising, depending on other waves, eventually dissolving back into the depths. Yet somewhere in this ocean of becoming, there must be something like the ocean floor itself, always there, unchanging, supporting everything that moves above it. This isn't merely a philosophical abstraction. In our age of rapid change, social upheaval, and technological uncertainty, Avicenna's necessary Existent offers something profound, a concept of absolute stability that doesn't depend on circumstances, politics, or market forces. It's the distinction between what we think we need and what we actually cannot live without. This framework transforms how we approach existence itself. Instead of beginning with individual things and asking why they exist, Avicenna invites us to begin with existence itself and ask what it means to be real in the most fundamental sense. The necessary existent becomes not just a theological conclusion, but a lens through which to examine every aspect of reality. In our personal lives, this might translate to identifying those values, relationships, or principles that remain unchanged regardless of external circumstances. As we rest in this understanding, we carry forward a quiet confidence that somewhere in the structure of reality itself, there is that which cannot fail, which cannot be shaken, which simply is. In the year 1095, during what should have been a triumphant moment in his career, al-Ghazali found himself standing before his students, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, yet no words would emerge. The renowned scholar, respected throughout the Islamic world for his intellectual prowess, suddenly could not speak. This wasn't a physical ailment. It was the shattering of a man who had spent decades building a fortress of knowledge, only to discover that the foundation beneath it had been sand all along. His students watched in bewilderment as this intellectual giant struggled with words that simply would not come, as if the very act of teaching had become impossible. It was in this moment of profound silence that al-Ghazali began to understand something that would transform not just his own thinking, but the course of Islamic philosophy itself. That true knowledge demands not just the accumulation of facts and arguments, but the radical transformation of the knower. For months before this crisis, Al-Ghazali had been wrestling with questions that cut deeper than any theological dispute. As he sat in his study, surrounded by countless manuscripts and treatises, surrounded by the accolades of his position as head of the Nizamiya University in Baghdad, he began to sense a troubling disconnect between his outward status and his inner state. The prestige, the recognition, the intellectual admiration, all of it felt hollow when he asked himself the simple question, "Do I truly believe what I am teaching?" The certainty he had presented with such confidence began to crumble under the weight of this honest self-examination. He realized he had become skilled at convincing others of truths he had never deeply internalized himself. The crisis was not intellectual, it was existential, like a skilled actor who has forgotten his own identity after years of wearing masks. Al-Ghazali had become so proficient at wearing the robe of scholarship that he had lost touch with the man beneath it. This profound crisis led Al-Ghazali to make a decision that shocked his contemporaries. He abandoned his prestigious position, his comfortable life, and the academic world that had defined him. He retreated into solitude, seeking not just answers, but transformation. For nearly 10 years, he lived as a hermit, spending his time not in libraries, but in prayer, meditation, and direct spiritual experience. During this period of withdrawal from the intellectual world, he discovered something remarkable. Genuine certainty cannot be acquired through argument and analysis alone. It must be lived, experienced, embodied. Just as you cannot truly understand the taste of honey by reading about it or analyzing its chemical composition. Al-Ghazali realized that spiritual truths require direct experience. The mind, when isolated from the heart and soul, becomes like a compass without magnetic north. It points in all directions and none, sophisticated in its reasoning yet fundamentally lost. What makes Al-Ghazali's crisis so remarkably relevant to our modern age is how it mirrors a form of spiritual burnout that many of us experience today. We live in an era of endless information, where knowledge is abundant, but wisdom is scarce. Like Al-Ghazali, many of us have mastered the art of appearing confident while feeling increasingly disconnected from what we claim to believe. We excel in our professions, accumulate achievements, and present our lives to the world with polished presentations. Yet internally, we struggle with what psychologists now call moral injury, the pain that comes from living in ways that contradict our deepest values. Modern research on burnout reveals that it occurs not just from working too much, but from working in ways that feel inauthentic, from careers built on external validation rather than inner calling. Al-Ghazali's crisis was fundamentally about the misalignment between his outer success and his inner truth. The wisdom that emerged from Al-Ghazali's crisis offers us a profound practice, the regular and honest examination of whether our external actions align with our internal compass. Like Al-Ghazali, we must occasionally step back from the roles we play and ask ourselves, what am I truly seeking? What do I actually believe? And how do my daily choices reflect these deeper commitments? The goal is not the complete abandonment of our responsibilities. Al-Ghazali did return to teaching, though with transformed purpose, but rather the integration of inner truth with outer action. When knowledge becomes not just information we possess, but wisdom we embody, when our actions flow naturally from our deepest convictions, we discover the kind of certainty that Al-Ghazali spent a lifetime seeking and eventually found, not in books or arguments, but in the sacred space where knowing and being become one. Al-Ghazali questioned the philosophers' assumptions about causality, revealing the limits of human reason. The moment shows his bold critique of Avicennian metaphysics. In the quiet halls of medieval Baghdad, while teaching at the prestigious Nizamiya College, this brilliant theologian undertook perhaps the most devastating critique of rational philosophy ever written. His target was not philosophy itself, but the presumption that human reason could unravel all of existence's mysteries. Through his masterpiece, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, al-Ghazali didn't merely disagree with Avicenna's conclusions, he revealed the fundamental vulnerability in the philosopher's approach to understanding reality. His critique of causality strikes at the very heart of how we understand the world's workings. Consider the simple example that became legendary. When we see cotton burning in fire, we naturally assume the fire caused the cotton to burn. But al-Ghazali asks, how do we truly know this connection? Are we witnessing causation or merely observing succession? The philosophers had built elaborate metaphysical systems, assuming that one event necessarily follows another according to eternal laws. Yet al-Ghazali revealed this as an assumption, not a proven truth. Perhaps, he suggested, what we call causality is merely divine habit, God's consistent way of ordering events, but not a necessity that constrains even divine power. This wasn't merely theological rebellion, it was profound epistemological insight into the boundaries of human knowing. The insight that not all truths submit to rational proof becomes transformative when we consider its implications. For centuries, scholars had assumed that with enough logical rigor, all of existence could be mapped and understood through philosophical reasoning. Al-Ghazali's critique shattered this confidence, not through mysticism or anti-intellectualism, but through careful philosophical analysis. He showed how the philosophers had smugly assumed the very principles they were trying to prove. In seeking to demonstrate God's existence through pure reason, they had made reason sovereign over revelation. The theologian's deeper wisdom lay in recognizing that some truths, the fundamental nature of existence, divine causality, the ultimate purposes of being, require humility before they can be approached at all. Today, as we navigate an era marked by unprecedented scientific uncertainty and economic unpredictability, al-Ghazali's insights feel remarkably contemporary. Climate science's complex models reveal the limits of our predictive certainty. Financial markets, despite sophisticated algorithms and mathematical modeling, still experience crashes that seem to emerge from what might be called divine surprise. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated how even our most advanced epidemiological models could not capture the full complexity of emerging reality. These aren't failures of science, they're reminders of the profound complexity that underlies existence itself. The wise approach lies not in abandoning rational planning, but in planning with the humility that recognizes reality's depths exceed our conceptual grasp. In our personal lives, this ancient wisdom offers a pathway to greater peace. We can make careful plans while accepting that our assumptions about how things will unfold may prove inadequate. We can pursue knowledge and rational analysis while remaining open to the possibility that reality will surprise us in ways our categories cannot capture. Al-Ghazali's challenge to the philosophers wasn't an invitation to abandon reason, but to practice it with proper humility, using it as a tool for exploration while acknowledging its boundaries. In this balanced approach, we find a way to engage thoughtfully with a world that is both rationally comprehensible and mysteriously deeper than our concepts can fully contain. In the twilight of Islamic Spain's golden age, when the political foundations of Andalusia began to crumble and intellectual centers faced mounting pressures, Ibn Rushd, known to the Western world as Averroes, picked up his pen with the determination of a guardian protecting a sacred flame. His work, The Incoherence of the Incoherence, stands as one of philosophy's most courageous defenses of rational inquiry, as not merely compatible with faith, but as a divine gift worthy of the highest reverence. This was no mere academic exercise, but a philosophical salvation mission. A scholar recognizing that the very tools of reason that had built the magnificent libraries of Cordoba were being questioned by the very authorities meant to preserve Islamic learning. Picture, if you will, Averroes in his study in 12th century Cordoba, surrounded by Aristotle's texts, the Quran's verses, and the accumulated wisdom of Islamic philosophy. The weight of history rests on his shoulders as he crafts his response to al-Ghazali's devastating critique of the philosophical tradition. But rather than retreating into defensive theology or abandoning reason for pure mysticism, Averroes performs an intellectual alchemy, transforming what many saw as an irreconcilable conflict into a profound synthesis. His insight transcends the simplistic notion that faith and reason must be enemies, revealing instead that they dance together in a cosmic harmony, each illuminating aspects of truth that the other cannot reach alone. This philosophical dance between revelation and reason that Averroes articulated resonates with startling clarity in our contemporary world, where we witness similar tensions between scientific inquiry and spiritual understanding, between secular knowledge and religious wisdom. The modern debates over secularism, whether in education, public policy, or personal identity, echo the very questions that consumed Averroes 8 centuries ago. How do we honor both the empirical discoveries that expand our understanding of the cosmos and the deeper meanings that speak to our souls? How do we integrate the analytical tools that solve practical problems with the contemplative practices that nurture our spirits? Undefined, imagine, if you will, a vast library that exists not in any physical space, but in the very essence of human consciousness itself. This is the vision that Ibn Rushd, known in the Latin West as Averroes, offered us through his concept of the active intellect. He described this as a universal intellect, a cosmic mind that connects all human understanding, as if every thought that has ever been conceived somehow participates in this collective intellectual treasury of humanity. This remarkable insight suggests that our individual minds are not isolated islands of thought, but rather individual waves upon an ocean of shared understanding. When we grasp a truth, when we comprehend a mathematical principle or recognize a beautiful piece of art, Averroes would argue that we are somehow participating in this universal intellect. It's as if our personal understanding serves as a window through which the collective wisdom of human civilization streams into our individual consciousness. What makes this concept particularly fascinating is how prescient it proves to be in our modern age. Today's digital information networks create what can only be described as a technological manifestation of Averroes' universal intellect. Every search query, every shared article, every online discussion contributes to what resembles a global collective consciousness. When we Google a question or contribute to a Wikipedia article, we are, in a very real sense, participating in this shared intellectual space that Averroes envisioned centuries before the internet was even conceivable. And so, we return to the practical wisdom that Ibn Rushd offers us. Understanding arises through participation, through thoughtful contribution to our shared intellectual spaces. Each comment we leave, each insight we share, each moment we choose to add something meaningful to our collective discourse contributes to this universal intellect. In our digital age, we are all guardians and contributors to this vast ocean of human understanding. The question that settles upon us now is not merely what we can gain from this collective mind, but what we can offer to it, and how our individual insights might enrich the shared wisdom of humanity itself. When Avicenna treated illness, he saw body and soul as intertwined, revealing a unified human nature. The moment explores holistic medicine. Picture, if you will, a physician in 11th century Persia, not merely examining symptoms, but sensing the deeper currents flowing through a patient's entire being. Ibn Sina, known to the Western world as Avicenna, approached each healing encounter as a sacred investigation into the mystery of human wholeness. In his famous Canon of Medicine, which would remain the definitive medical text in European universities for over 600 years, he wrote not just of anatomy and pathology, but of the invisible threads connecting thoughts, emotions, physical symptoms, and spiritual well-being. For Ibn Sina, every fever carried with it the temperature of the soul's distress, every pain whispered the language of the heart's burden. He understood that to heal the body without addressing the spirit was like trying to mend a torn tapestry by reweaving only a single thread. The whole cloth would remain frayed and incomplete. The insight is that health includes spiritual and psychological balance. Ibn Sina's revolutionary understanding emerged from his synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy with Islamic metaphysics, creating what we might call today a truly integrative medicine. He taught that the rational soul, the sensitive soul, and the vegetative soul, the three levels of human consciousness he inherited from classical philosophy, must work in harmony for true health to flourish. When anxiety disturbed the rational soul, it would manifest as digestive disorders in the vegetative soul. When grief weighted down the sensitive soul, it would express itself through the body's immune response. This wasn't mere speculation. Ibn Sina documented thousands of cases in his medical practice, showing how patients recovered more completely when their treatment addressed the full spectrum of their being. He prescribed not just medicines and dietary changes, but also recommended specific types of music, poetry recitations, and even particular garden walks that would restore the soul's equilibrium and thereby heal the body. Today's mental health movements echo this ancient wisdom with remarkable precision. Modern psychotherapy, with its recognition of the mind-body connection, its understanding of trauma's physical manifestations, and its holistic approach to healing, resonates deeply with Ibn Sina's insights from 1,000 years ago. The current revolution in functional medicine, which treats the body as an integrated ecosystem rather than a collection of separate organs, mirrors his insistence that no symptom exists in isolation. Contemporary research into the placebo effect validates his understanding that belief, hope, and spiritual alignment have measurable healing properties. Even the growing recognition that chronic stress and emotional trauma contribute directly to physical disease bears out his insight that the soul's condition shapes the body's expression. Ibn Sina would not be surprised by our modern discoveries about the gut-brain axis, the immune system's sensitivity to emotional states, or the role of meaning and purpose in healing. He would simply nod knowingly, having observed these connections in his medical practice over a millennium ago. Viewers can apply it through practices that align mind and body. Consider beginning each day with what Ibn Sina might have called spiritual diagnostics, taking a moment to notice not just how your body feels, but how your thoughts flow, what emotions surface, and whether your spirit feels aligned with your purpose. Before reaching for medication when experiencing physical discomfort, ask yourself, what is my soul trying to communicate through this symptom? Create healing environments in your daily life that honor the mind-body-soul connection. Surround yourself with natural light and green spaces. Cultivate relationships that nourish your spirit. Engage with music and poetry that elevate your consciousness. Practice what Ibn Sina called therapeutic contemplation, spending time in reflection that integrates your intellectual understanding with your emotional experience and your spiritual values. When facing illness or stress, adopt his holistic approach. Address the physical symptoms while simultaneously working to understand their emotional or spiritual origins. Remember that true healing, as Ibn Sina taught, is not the elimination of symptoms, but the restoration of harmony across all aspects of your being, the symphony of your existence playing once again in perfect resonance. And so we rest in this understanding that the wisdom of healing through wholeness, discovered by Ibn Sina in the courts of ancient Persia, continues to illuminate our path toward well-being in our modern world. The light of integrated healing guides us toward a deeper understanding of our own unified nature. In the quiet halls of 12th century Persia, a revolutionary thinker named Shahab al-Din Suhrawardi gazed upon the world and saw something extraordinary. Knowledge itself, he realized, was not merely the cold accumulation of facts or the mechanical manipulation of concepts. Instead, it was light, pure, illuminating, transforming light that reveals truth in its most essential form. This profound insight would give birth to what he called Ishraq, the philosophy of illumination, a mystical dimension of philosophy that would forever change how we understand the relationship between mind, reality, and divine wisdom. Suhrawardi's genius lay in his recognition that truth could be apprehended not only through logical deduction and empirical observation, but through what he termed luminous intuition, a direct, immediate knowing that illuminates the object of knowledge from within, like the gentle dawn that reveals a landscape hidden in darkness. This inner light makes visible the deeper patterns and connections that elude ordinary consciousness. His masterwork, the Book of the Wisdom of Illumination, completed in 1186, presented a startling premise that light operates at all levels and hierarchies of reality, from the most abstract intellectual concepts to the material world we inhabit through our senses. What makes Illuminationism particularly fascinating is how it bridges the gap between rational philosophy and mystical experience. Suhrawardi drew upon the rich traditions of Avicennism, Neoplatonism, and ancient Iranian wisdom, yet synthesized them into something entirely new, a philosophy where the light of understanding emerges from the intersection of reason and revelation, intellect and intuition. This wasn't merely an intellectual exercise, but a practical path toward realizing that the same illuminating principle that lights our minds also lights the cosmos itself. The philosopher becomes, in his vision, a participant in the divine act of illumination. Remarkably, contemporary research in creativity and insight confirms what Suhrawardi intuited centuries ago. Modern neuroscience speaks of those aha moments when solutions emerge not through linear thinking but through sudden illumination, when disparate elements suddenly cohere into meaningful patterns. This reflects his understanding that true knowledge often arrives as intuitive recognition, like light breaking through clouds. In our age of information overload, his wisdom offers a profound invitation to cultivate the inner conditions where genuine insight can emerge, to pay attention to those moments when understanding dawns naturally without forcing or straining. And so Suhrawardi's legacy reminds us that philosophy at its deepest level is not about accumulating more information, but about kindling the inner light of understanding that reveals the hidden harmony underlying all existence. In recognizing knowledge as illumination, he opened a path where reason and mysticism dance together, where the pursuit of truth becomes itself a form of prayer. Let us rest in this wisdom, that the same light that illuminates our understanding also illuminates the world, waiting patiently for us to recognize its presence. What if the soul ascends through stages of awareness? Islamic philosophers described a journey of purification toward ultimate knowledge. This scene maps an inner ascent. Picture your consciousness as a ladder, each rung representing a deeper layer of understanding about yourself and the divine. Just as a traveler moves from village to village across a vast landscape, the soul travels through spiritual stations, each one revealing new perspectives on existence. The journey begins not with grand revelations, but with the quiet recognition that there is more to understand about the nature of reality and our place within it. In the Islamic philosophical tradition, this ascent is known through various stages of purification, beginning with the purification of the heart, then the refinement of character, and finally the illumination of the intellect. The early Sufi masters spoke of tazkiyah, a process of spiritual cleansing that removes the accumulated layers of ego, materialism, and spiritual forgetfulness that cloud our inner vision. Each stage requires patience and dedication, much like a craftsman refining raw metal through repeated heating and hammering. The soul doesn't rush through these stages but moves with deliberate awareness, integrating each lesson before ascending to the next level of understanding. The ultimate destination of this journey is what Islamic philosophers call the station of ihsan, spiritual excellence, where one worships God as if seeing Him, knowing that even when we cannot see Him, He certainly sees us. This isn't merely intellectual knowledge, but a lived experience of divine presence that transforms how one moves through the world. Modern psychology recognizes this same pattern in its concept of self-actualization and the stages of moral development. Contemporary research in positive psychology echoes the Islamic insight that human flourishing follows a predictable pattern of growth, where individuals move from basic needs fulfillment toward increasingly sophisticated forms of wisdom and compassion. This ancient framework offers profound guidance for our modern lives. Instead of seeking quick fixes or instant transformation, we can embrace the Islamic understanding that genuine growth happens gradually, like the slow erosion of mountains by persistent rain. Each small act of kindness, each moment of honest self-reflection, each instance of choosing wisdom over impulse, these accumulate like drops filling a vessel. The journey of the soul reminds us that we are not fixed beings, but ever-evolving souls, capable of ascending toward greater awareness, deeper compassion, and more authentic wisdom. And so, with patience for the process and trust in our capacity for transformation, we continue our gentle ascent toward the light that already resides within us. Tonight, we step into one of the most profound debates that shaped Islamic intellectual history. Theologians long ago wrestled with a question that continues to haunt human consciousness. Are our actions truly free, or are they bound by forces beyond our control? This wasn't merely academic speculation, but a fundamental inquiry into the nature of human responsibility, moral accountability, and the very structure of existence itself. The debates between these schools of thought reveal deep tensions that cut to the heart of what it means to be human in a universe governed by divine wisdom. And tonight, we explore how this ancient wisdom speaks directly to our contemporary struggles with agency and choice. Picture, if you will, the great intellectual centers of Baghdad and Basra in the 9th and 10th centuries, where brilliant minds gathered in scholarly circles to wrestle with this most fundamental question. The Mu'tazilites, with their emphasis on human autonomy, argued that we possess genuine free will, that our choices are truly our own, born from our rational deliberation and moral agency. They envisioned human beings as moral agents who could not be held accountable for actions they had no power to choose. Meanwhile, the Ash'arites presented a different vision, one that emphasized divine sovereignty and predestination, suggesting that Allah's knowledge encompasses all things and that human actions, in their essence, are created by God while humans merely acquire responsibility for them. This wasn't merely about theology, it was about the very possibility of moral discourse itself, and so we arrive at a profound insight that emerges from this philosophical tension. Freedom, these scholars gradually realized, doesn't mean acting without any constraints or consequences. Rather, it exists within a larger moral structure, a framework that balances divine sovereignty with human responsibility, creating space for genuine choice while honoring ultimate accountability. Think of it as a garden where certain boundaries exist, the climate, the soil, the seasons. Yet within these parameters, the gardener still makes countless meaningful choices about what to plant, how to tend, and when to harvest. This insight offers a more nuanced understanding of human agency, one that neither denies our capacity for choice nor ignores the broader forces that shape our existence. Today, as we navigate our complex modern world, these ancient debates resonate with remarkable clarity. Consider how social media algorithms shape our attention, how economic systems influence our opportunities, how cultural expectations guide our decisions. Yet within these structures, we still make countless choices that matter, still hold moral agency, still bear responsibility for our responses to circumstances beyond our control. The wisdom of this philosophical tradition suggests that mature freedom comes not from denying our constraints, but from accepting them while still choosing to act with integrity, compassion, and wisdom within the space we've been given. Let this thought settle into your consciousness as you drift towards sleep. The true freedom lies not in acting without limits, but in choosing how to respond within life's beautiful boundaries. What if the value of an action lies primarily in intention? Islamic thinkers explored this deeply. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine two people performing the same charitable act. One gives money to help others, their heart filled with genuine compassion and desire to alleviate suffering. The other gives the same amount, but driven by recognition, by the desire to be seen as generous, perhaps even to ease their own guilt. The external action appears identical, yet something fundamental differs between these moments. Islamic philosophers recognize this profound truth, that the inner landscape of our motives shapes not merely the moral weight of our deeds, but perhaps their very essence in the eyes of the divine. This insight highlights a sophisticated understanding of moral psychology that recognizes intention as the master key to ethical authenticity. The concept of niyyah, or pure intention, becomes the foundation upon which all meaningful action rests. Think of it as the difference between a candle that burns to illuminate another's path and one that burns merely to display its own flame. The light produced may be identical, but the purpose transforms everything. Islamic scholars, like those in the tradition of spiritual psychology, understood that our inner motives function as the invisible architecture of our character. When we act from generosity, our souls expand toward compassion. When we act from ego, we risk building walls around our hearts. This moral psychology teaches us that we become the stories we tell ourselves about why we do what we do. What makes this particularly fascinating is how modern self-help movements have independently rediscovered this ancient wisdom through their emphasis on mindset and visualization. Today, we speak of leaning into positive intentions, of setting intentions before meditation or exercise, of aligning our why with our actions. The contemporary emphasis on mindfulness and conscious choice-making echoes this classical insight that intention shapes reality from the inside out. But Islamic philosophers went even deeper, recognizing that intention operates not just as a psychological tool for achieving goals, but as the very criterion by which our actions acquire moral weight. When we examine our choices through this lens, we begin to see how often we act from habit, from social pressure, from unconscious motivations, rather than from our deepest values and authentic desires. This creates a beautiful invitation for gentle self-examination. Before reacting to a difficult situation, pause and ask yourself, what intention am I bringing to this moment? Before posting on social media, before making a decision that affects others, before even beginning your morning routine, Consider the quality of intention you wish to cultivate. This isn't about perfection or judgment, but about cultivating a deeper relationship with your own inner motivations. Like a gardener learning to understand the soil in which they plant, we learn to understand the intentions in which we root our actions. And in this understanding, we discover the profound freedom that comes from living more consciously, more aligned with our deepest values. The external world may remain unchanged, but our inner landscape transforms, and in doing so, everything changes. And so we return to that gentle question with which we began. What if the value of an action lies primarily in intention? Perhaps this insight offers us not just a moral framework, but a pathway to greater authenticity and inner peace. When we honor the quality of our motives, we honor the essence of who we are becoming. Let this thought rest with you as we prepare for what comes next in our journey through the landscape of wisdom. Al-Farabi argued that justice emerges when each person fulfills their innate role. Picture a symphony orchestra, each musician with their unique instrument, creating harmony not through sameness, but through the precise fulfillment of their individual function within the greater composition. The great philosopher of the 10th century understood that social harmony emerges not from enforced uniformity, but from the authentic expression of each person's distinctive gifts and responsibilities within the community. This concept, central to his vision of the virtuous city, suggests that when we deny our authentic roles or force others into unsuitable positions, the entire social fabric becomes unraveled, like threads pulled from a tapestry, leaving gaps that disrupt the whole. The scenario that al-Farabi presents is one of elegant interdependence, a community balancing talents and needs like a carefully orchestrated ecosystem. In his Virtuous city, the wise ruler recognizes each citizen's capacities and guides them toward roles where they can flourish while serving the greater good. The scholar finds fulfillment in pursuit of knowledge, the craftsman in creating useful goods, the healer in tending to the sick, and the teacher in nurturing young minds. This is not rigid hierarchy, but organic social organization, where each person's contribution is valued and their growth is supported. The harmony emerges naturally when this recognition and alignment occurs, creating a society where both individual excellence and collective flourishing are possible. The insight is profound. Harmony requires cooperation, not just coexistence. Al-Farabi understood that social fragmentation, the very disconnection we observe in our modern world, stems from the breakdown of this natural order. When people are pushed into roles that don't align with their abilities or values, or when their contributions go unrecognized, resentment builds and cooperation becomes impossible. We see this in our contemporary social landscape, communities divided not by natural differences, but by systems that prevent people from finding their meaningful place. The philosopher's remedy was radical then and remains radical now, creating conditions where each person can discover and fulfill their authentic role while contributing to something larger than themselves. You can apply this wisdom by fostering constructive roles in your own community. Look around your workplace, your neighborhood, your circles of friendship. Where do you see people yearning to contribute but lacking the opportunity? Where might you help others discover their gifts or create space for their unique contributions? Perhaps it's mentoring someone whose talents go unrecognized, or creating a project that allows different people to shine in different ways. The ripple effects of such conscious role alignment extend far beyond immediate relationships, contributing to the healing of our broader social fabric. In honoring both your own authentic expression and others' distinctive contributions, you participate in the ancient practice of justice that al-Farabi recognized as the foundation of all lasting harmony. Averroes, known as Ibn Rushd, stood at the threshold between the golden age of Islamic philosophy and a world growing increasingly wary of intellectual inquiry. In the twilight of the 12th century, as the peripatetic Arabic school reached its culmination with his work, he made a declaration that would echo through centuries. Seeking knowledge is not merely a personal pursuit, but an ethical obligation incumbent upon every thinking being. Picture, if you will, the scholars of his era, those brave custodians of wisdom who, even as political storms raged around them, meticulously copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving the accumulated insights of generations. They understood something profound, that knowledge, like a precious flame, must be tended not just for oneself, but for the collective illumination of humanity. This notion that ignorance harms collective well-being represents one of Averroes' most revolutionary contributions to ethical thought. Where others might view knowledge as private property, something to be hoarded or shared selectively, Averroes conceived of it as a form of social responsibility. The philosopher who could understand the mysteries of existence had a moral duty to share that understanding, to lift others from the shadows of confusion. Consider the profound implications. In Averroes' framework, the person who remains deliberately ignorant does not merely limit themselves, but actually causes harm to their community, their civilization, and the broader human project of understanding our place in creation. In our contemporary moment, as we navigate an age of unprecedented information accessibility coupled with alarming levels of misinformation, Averroes' insight feels remarkably prescient. We live in a world where facts and falsehoods intermingle freely in our digital feeds, where confirmation bias masquerades as research, and where the comfortable illusions of echo chambers often feel preferable to the challenging complexities of truth. Yet Averroes reminds us that this very challenge demands not retreat, but deeper commitment to intellectual integrity. The moral obligation to seek knowledge becomes, in our time, a moral obligation to distinguish signal from noise, to pursue reliable sources, and to maintain the humility of lifelong learning. And so, we find in Averroes' ancient wisdom a practical guide for modern application. Approach each piece of information with the reverence of a scholar preserving texts through turmoil. Question not from cynicism, but from love of truth. Engage in lifelong learning not as a hobby, but as a moral duty to the collective human enterprise of understanding. For in the end, Averroes teaches us that knowledge is not a burden we carry alone, but a light we are privileged to tend for the benefit of all who share this fragile, beautiful world of human consciousness. Mystical philosophers describe the ego as a veil over deeper awareness. This profound metaphor captures one of the most delicate insights of Islamic spiritual wisdom, that the self we commonly identify with, this sense of I that seems so solid and permanent, is actually a shimmering curtain that obscures our truest nature. The Arabic term nafsi encompasses not just ego, but that entire layer of personality, desires, and self-centered concerns that emerge between our conscious mind and our deeper spiritual essence. These mystics understood that beneath this veil lies an ocean of awareness that is vast, compassionate, and intimately connected to the divine presence that permeates all existence. Like morning mist that appears solid until the sun's warmth reveals it as mere vapor, our ego-constructed identity seems substantial until we begin to examine it with gentle curiosity. The scene explores practices of self-purification, and here, Islamic philosophy offers us perhaps one of humanity's most sophisticated frameworks for what contemporary psychology might call inner work. The concept of tazkiyah, that process of continual purification and refinement of the soul, became the cornerstone of Sufi practice. These practitioners understood that self-purification wasn't about suppressing parts of ourselves, but about developing what they called muraqaba, a kind of watchful presence that observes without judgment. They employed gentle disciplines like dhikr, the remembrance of divine qualities, not as mechanical repetition, but as a way of gradually shifting our inner orientation from self-centeredness toward remembrance of the sacred dimension underlying all experience. The goal wasn't to eliminate the ego entirely, but to transform it from a prison into a window, something that allows light to pass through rather than blocking it. The insight is the transformative power of self-awareness, and this is where ancient Islamic wisdom offers something remarkably prescient for our contemporary age. When Rumi wrote about drowning in the ocean of self, he was describing what we might now call the recursive loops of self-referential thinking, those endless mental narratives about me, myself, and I that can consume our inner landscape. Modern mindfulness research confirms what these mystics intuited centuries ago, that simply observing our thoughts and feelings without immediately identifying with them creates space for genuine transformation. The practice of muhasaba, regular self-accounting, became a systematic method for developing what we now call metacognition, awareness of awareness itself. This isn't self-criticism or harsh judgment, but rather a gentle turning inward to observe the witness consciousness that experiences all our thoughts and emotions without being swept away by them. Modern mindfulness aligns with this, and viewers can apply it through gentle daily reflection. The remarkable thing is how contemporary psychological research has validated these ancient practices. Studies on self-awareness show that the ability to observe our own mental processes correlates directly with emotional regulation, creativity, and overall well-being. But the Islamic philosophers understood something that modern science is only beginning to grasp, that this self-awareness practice isn't just psychologically beneficial, but spiritually transformative in the deepest sense. When we sit quietly and simply notice our thoughts arising and passing like clouds moving across a vast sky, we are participating in the same essential practice that these mystics used to remember their connection to the infinite. You might try this tonight, before sleep. Spend 5 minutes simply observing your breathing and noticing the sense of awareness that experiences your breath. This gentle practice honors both ancient wisdom and modern understanding, showing us that the journey inward is always simultaneously a journey toward the universal. As we rest in this understanding that the ego is not an enemy to be conquered, but a veil to be gently lifted, may we find peace in the vast awareness that witnesses all our thoughts and dreams. Debates about reason and revelation shaped centuries of Islamic thought. The scene presents scholars seeking balance. Picture, if you will, the great houses of learning in Baghdad and Cordoba, where philosophers would gather in quiet courtyards, scrolls of Aristotle's works beside volumes of Quranic commentary. These weren't competing forces, but rather two streams flowing toward the same ocean of understanding. The insight is that wisdom draws from multiple sources, and so we can gently turn our attention to how these ancient debates speak directly to the tensions we feel today. The medieval Islamic world witnessed profound debates between the rationalists, like al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, who emphasized philosophical reasoning, and those who prioritized revealed truth. Yet it was the great synthesizers who created something beautiful. Al-Ghazali, for instance, who showed how logic could illuminate spiritual understanding, while Ibn Rushd demonstrated how revelation could be enriched by philosophical inquiry. Today's tension between science and tradition reflects the same challenge. Consider how we often feel divided between empirical evidence and inherited wisdom, between what we can measure and what we know to be true through experience and faith. The Islamic philosophical tradition teaches us that revelation provides the moral compass, while reason offers the vessel for navigation. Like stars in the night sky, revelation gives us direction, while reason helps us chart the course. Think about how this applies in your own life, perhaps when faced with a medical decision that requires both scientific data and consideration of your deepest values, or when considering career choices that must honor both practical realities and spiritual calling. The harmony emerges not from choosing one over the other, but from understanding how each illuminates the other's blind spots. You can apply this ancient wisdom by consciously integrating your empirical knowledge with your personal values. When making decisions, ask not just what the data tells you, but what your deepest wisdom, accumulated through tradition, experience, and reflection, contributes to understanding. This isn't about abandoning critical thinking, but about expanding it to include dimensions of meaning that pure reason alone cannot reach. Like skilled artisans who know both the properties of their materials and the purpose of their creation, we too can learn to weave together evidence and values into a coherent tapestry of understanding. In this integration lies a path toward the harmony that Islamic philosophers long sought, a way of knowing that honors both the light of reason and the light of revelation. Islamic philosophers influenced Thomas Aquinas and the scholastics, revealing their hidden reach. The moment shows translations entering European universities. The insight is that ideas cross borders long before people do. Modern globalization mirrors this exchange. Viewers can apply this by appreciating the interconnectedness of knowledge. Picture, if you will, a great library in the heart of medieval Europe, perhaps in Paris or Bologna, where scholars huddle over manuscripts that have traveled hundreds of miles from distant lands. These aren't just books. They carry within them the very thoughts of philosophers who lived in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo. The influence of Islamic thought on European medieval philosophy represents one of history's most profound intellectual exchanges, yet it happened largely in silence, without fanfare, carried forward by patient translators who understood that knowledge belongs to no single culture. The most remarkable aspect of this transmission lies in how ideas traveled independently of people. While crusaders marched and merchants traded, philosophers' manuscripts moved quietly through networks of scholarship. Ibn Sina's medical treatises, Averroes' commentaries on Aristotle, and al-Farabi's works on logic found their way into European monasteries and universities. These texts didn't arrive as conquests or invasions, but as gifts from one mind to another, crossing linguistic and religious boundaries with an elegance that modern technology can barely replicate. Consider the magnificent irony. Christian scholars studying Averroes, the great Islamic philosopher who wrote extensively about Aristotle. The very texts that shaped medieval European thought came from a civilization that some Europeans considered foreign or even hostile. Yet the pursuit of wisdom transcended these boundaries, creating what we might call the first truly international intellectual community, linked not by geography or politics, but by shared questions about existence, knowledge, and virtue. The institutional manifestation of this exchange appeared in places like the Toledo School of Translators during the 12th and 13th centuries. Here, working in a city that had shifted from Islamic to Christian rule, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars collaborated to render Arabic philosophical works into Latin. This wasn't mere translation, it was cultural interpretation, philosophical dialogue across religious traditions. Each translation became a bridge between civilizations, each commentary an invitation to deeper understanding. The scholastic movement, with Thomas Aquinas as its crown jewel, embodied this synthesis. Aquinas studied Avicenna's writings extensively. incorporated Islamic logical techniques, and engaged with Averroes' interpretations of Aristotle. Yet these influences were often disguised, filtered through Christian theological frameworks that made foreign wisdom acceptable to European audiences. The great irony is that much of what we consider distinctly European medieval philosophy carries within it the intellectual DNA of Islamic scholarship. This historical pattern illuminates something profound about knowledge itself. Ideas possess a kind of independence that transcends human limitations. They migrate through time and space, adapting to new contexts while maintaining their essential character. In our era of digital connectivity and instant communication, we often forget that this process of intellectual exchange has been humanity's constant companion. The same mechanisms that carried Aristotle's philosophy from ancient Greece to medieval Baghdad to 13th century Paris now carry our thoughts instantly across continents. The lesson extends beyond academic history into our contemporary experience. We live in an age where the boundaries between cultures seem both more permeable and more contested than ever. Yet the underlying reality remains unchanged. Knowledge flows along paths of human curiosity and intellectual honesty. The Islamic philosophical tradition's influence on medieval Europe demonstrates that wisdom recognizes no borders, that the best human thinking emerges from dialogue rather than isolation. As we navigate our interconnected world, we might pause to consider how many of our own fundamental ideas have roots in distant intellectual traditions. The concept of reason as a bridge between faith and knowledge, the method of careful logical analysis, even our notion of universal human dignity, all carry echoes of this great exchange. The task for each of us becomes not merely to consume this inherited wisdom, but to participate actively in its ongoing journey, adding our own understanding to the vast conversation that spans cultures and centuries. Philosophers like Ibn Rushd anticipated conflicts between religion and science centuries before they peaked. The scene illustrates their nuanced solutions. The insight is that harmonization is possible with careful thinking. Tonight we journey into the remarkable prescience of Islamic philosophers who, in the 12th century, were already wrestling with questions that would only fully emerge in Western discourse centuries later. Ibn Rushd, known in the Latin world as Averroes, was born in Cordoba in 1126, a time when the intellectual center of the world had shifted to the Islamic Golden Age. He witnessed firsthand the tensions between traditional religious authority and the growing power of rational inquiry. Yet rather than seeing these as irreconcilable forces, he crafted what might be the most sophisticated approach to harmonizing reason and revelation that the world had yet seen. Ibn Rushd's approach was remarkably sophisticated. He argued that philosophy was not only permissible within Islam, but was actually compulsory among certain elites, those with the intellectual capacity to navigate the deepest truths. His famous principle was that scriptural text should be interpreted allegorically if it appeared to contradict conclusions reached by reason and philosophy. This wasn't a dismissal of religious truth, but rather a recognition that truth operates on multiple levels. He understood that the apparent conflict between religious texts and scientific observation often stemmed from shallow reading rather than genuine contradiction. Think of it as recognizing that a complex poem can have both literal meaning and deeper metaphorical truths. The apparent conflict dissolves when we read with sufficient nuance and wisdom. Today's public discourse often lacks this subtlety entirely. We witness the same conflicts Ibn Rushd anticipated playing out in our contemporary world. Debates about evolution and creationism, climate science and religious belief, neurobiology and the nature of consciousness. Yet our public square rarely approaches these questions with the intellectual sophistication that Ibn Rushd brought to similar tensions 8 centuries ago. Modern discourse tends to be polarized between those who see science and religion as eternal enemies and those who seek simple compromise. But Ibn Rushd pointed toward a third path, not compromise, but harmonization through deeper understanding. This requires the humility to recognize that our initial readings of both scientific evidence and religious texts may be incomplete, and the patience to seek the deeper harmony that emerges when both forms of truth are engaged with full intellectual rigor. We can apply this wisdom in our daily lives by approaching disagreements not as battles to be won, but as invitations to deeper understanding. When faced with heated debates about science and religion, politics and morality, we can remember Ibn Rushd's insight that apparent contradictions often dissolve under careful analysis. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult questions or settling for superficial answers. Rather, it means engaging with the same intellectual courage and humility that these great philosophers brought to their most challenging problems. The goal isn't to eliminate all disagreement, but to transform our approach to disagreement itself, from a source of division to an opportunity for growth. In this way, the wisdom of Islamic philosophy offers us not just historical insight, but a practical framework for navigating the complexities of modern life with both intellectual rigor and genuine wisdom. The Nahda movement rediscovered classical Islamic thought, revealing its enduring relevance. The setting is a world awakening after colonial disruption. The insight is that traditions can renew themselves. Today's intellectual revivals echo this pattern. Viewers can apply it by revisiting forgotten sources of wisdom. In the late 19th century, as European powers extended their influence across the Islamic world, a remarkable intellectual awakening began to unfold. This was the Nahda, the Arabic word for renaissance or awakening, that would fundamentally reshape how Muslims approach their own philosophical heritage. Think of it as a great river that had been diverted by colonial forces, suddenly finding its way back to its original course, bringing with it the accumulated wisdom of centuries. At the heart of this revival stood figures like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, a philosopher and political activist who traveled throughout the Muslim world, igniting minds with the possibility that Islam could engage with modernity without losing its essential character. Al-Afghani, who lived from 1838 to 1897, understood that the challenge facing Muslims was not merely political or military, but fundamentally intellectual. How could a civilization that had once led the world in philosophy, science, and mathematics regain its confidence in the face of European dominance? His answer lay in returning to the sources, not in blind imitation, but in a creative re-engagement with the great thinkers of the classical period. It was as if a library that had been sealed for centuries was being reopened, its books speaking with renewed relevance to contemporary challenges. This pattern of renewal through return reveals something profound about the nature of intellectual traditions. Like the phoenix that rises from its own ashes, the Nahda showed that living traditions possess an inherent capacity for self-renewal. The key lay not in abandoning the past, but in approaching it with fresh eyes, asking new questions of ancient wisdom. This same pattern we see today in various intellectual revivals: the return to classical philosophy and contemporary ethics, the rediscovery of indigenous knowledge systems in environmental thinking, the revival of contemplative practices in psychology. Each represents what we might call the wisdom of return, not regression, but a spiral movement that returns to sources while reaching toward new heights. For us today, the Nahda offers a gentle lesson. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is to revisit what we thought we already knew. In our age of rapid change and information overload, there is profound wisdom in returning to foundational texts and ideas, not as escape from the present, but as a source of renewal for addressing contemporary challenges. The Nahda reminds us that the deepest sources of wisdom are not exhausted by past interpretations, but await fresh engagement from each new generation. And so, we find that true progress often begins not with forgetting the past, but with remembering it more deeply. Islamic philosophers believe that all knowledge points toward unity. Picture, if you will, a magnificent tapestry where every thread, though seemingly separate, weaves toward a single, magnificent design. This was the profound insight that guided the greatest minds of Islamic philosophy for centuries. They saw not a chaotic universe of scattered facts and competing truths, but rather a cosmos where every particle of knowledge, every revelation, every reasoned conclusion sang in harmony toward the same eternal reality. Ibn Arabi, the great Sufi philosopher of the 12th century, spoke of what he called wahdat al-wujud, the unity of being, suggesting that beneath all apparent multiplicity lies a single, undivided truth. When we step into this perspective, we begin to understand that every question we've ever asked, every mystery we've ever encountered, every fragment of wisdom we've ever gathered, all point toward this same eternal center. The scene reflects a cosmos infused with meaning. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a vast library, but instead of finding scattered, unrelated books, you discover that every volume opens to reveal pages that connect, that illuminate each other, that speak of the same fundamental truths using different languages and metaphors. This is how the great Islamic philosophers approached knowledge. Whether they were studying mathematics and the patterns of numbers, observing the intricate designs in nature, or contemplating the deeper meanings of divine revelation. They saw mathematics as revealing the harmony underlying physical reality, natural sciences as uncovering the wisdom embedded in creation, and philosophy as the human mind's capacity to grasp these eternal truths. Even today, we witness this unity in how quantum physics speaks of an underlying field from which all particles emerge, how biology reveals the interconnected web of life, and how psychology explores the depths of human consciousness, all pointing toward the same insight that reality, at its deepest level, is unified. In today's noisy world, this offers calm orientation. We live in an age of information overload, where every screen floods us with competing narratives, where social media algorithms show us only fragments of truth, where we're encouraged to take sides in endless debates that seem to have no resolution. But the wisdom of Islamic philosophy reminds us that this fragmentation is merely apparent, like seeing only individual waves, while forgetting they all belong to the same ocean. When you feel overwhelmed by the chaos of modern information, you can return to this ancient insight. Notice how, even in our fragmented world, certain principles keep surfacing: compassion, justice, beauty, truth. These appear across all cultures and all genuine knowledge systems because they reflect the unity underlying all being. You can apply this by seeking coherence in your learning, rather than collecting random facts. Ask how each new piece of information connects to the larger picture, how it illuminates the deeper patterns of existence, how it contributes to your understanding of that eternal unity which Islamic philosophers spent lifetimes contemplating. The insight is that truth converges rather than fragments. And so, as we prepare to close our philosophical journey together, let this be your gentle compass. In every moment of confusion, remember that all genuine knowledge moves toward unity. In every feeling of being overwhelmed by life's complexity, recall that beneath the surface, chaos lies the same harmony that the ancient philosophers glimpsed in their deepest contemplations. You don't need to understand everything at once. Simply trust that your learning, your growth, your moments of wonder and questioning are all part of this beautiful convergence toward truth. Like rivers flowing toward the same sea, all paths of genuine knowledge lead home to unity. Rest in this understanding, and let it bring you peace. What if daily life became an act of philosophy? This is the profound question that Islamic thinkers invite us to contemplate. Picture for a moment the gentle rhythm of your morning ritual, the careful way you prepare tea, the mindful attention you give to greeting another person, the deliberate choice you make in how you respond to daily challenges. Islamic philosophers understood that these seemingly ordinary moments are not separate from wisdom, but are wisdom itself, lived and breathing through our everyday existence. The great scholars of Islamic philosophy, from al-Farabi's gentle guidance on character development to Ibn Sina's meditation on the harmony between reason and revelation, they all recognize that virtue is not something we study from books alone, but something we practice with each breath, each decision, each moment of choice. When you choose patience over anger, when you extend understanding rather than judgment, when you pause to consider the deeper meaning of your actions, you are participating in the same philosophical tradition that illuminated the golden age of Islamic thought. This is not merely intellectual exercise, but lived wisdom manifesting through your daily choices. Modern self-development research echoes this ancient insight in remarkable ways. Contemporary psychology validates what Islamic philosophers knew centuries ago, that wisdom emerges not from abstract knowledge, but from the consistent practice of reflective habits. The ancient concept of ihsan, of excellence in character, finds its modern expression in mindfulness practices, in the conscious cultivation of emotional intelligence, in the deliberate choice to align our actions with our deepest values. Whether you realize it or not, when you practice gratitude, when you choose compassion over criticism, when you seek to understand before being understood, you are walking in the footsteps of the great Islamic philosophers who understood that philosophy must breathe in the real world to be truly alive. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, consider this gentle invitation. Let your daily life become your philosophy laboratory. Begin with small practices, a moment of reflection before important decisions, a conscious pause to consider how your actions serve not just your interests, but the well-being of others. A simple practice of gratitude that transforms routine moments into opportunities for wisdom. These are not grand gestures, but they are the building blocks of a life lived with intention, where every day becomes a classroom for the deepest questions about how to exist with dignity, compassion, and understanding. In this way, wisdom becomes not something distant and academic, but something as close and immediate as your next breath, your next choice, your next moment of conscious living. Mystical philosophers taught that serenity arises when desire aligns with truth. The scene explores inner equilibrium. The insight is that peace is cultivated through disciplined awareness. Today's stress culture makes this message urgent. Viewers can apply it by creating routines that nurture calm attention. The masters of inner wisdom understood something profound about the human condition, that our deepest restlessness comes not from external circumstances, but from the misalignment between what we think we want and what our souls truly seek. When desire is shaped by the ephemeral whispers of ego and material craving, it creates a storm within that no external achievement can calm. But when desire becomes purified, refined like gold in the fire of contemplation, it naturally turns toward what is eternal and unchanging. This is the alchemy that the Sufi masters spoke of, the transformation of ordinary longing into spiritual yearning, where the heart's desire becomes one with the truth it seeks. Inner equilibrium emerges not through force or suppression, but through a gentle discipline of awareness that observes without judgment. The mindful soul learns to notice the constant fluctuations of thought and emotion, like clouds passing across the sky, observed, acknowledged, but not seized as truth. This disciplined attention creates a spaciousness within where peace can naturally arise. The ancient practice of muraqabah, the vigil of the heart, teaches us to rest in pure awareness itself, beyond the objects of awareness. In our age of endless distraction and digital demands, this disciplined awareness becomes not just spiritual practice, but necessary medicine for the modern mind. And so we return to the practical wisdom that can transform our daily existence. The routine that nurtures calm attention need not be elaborate, perhaps the morning practice of quiet reflection before the world awakens, or the evening practice of gratitude that transforms the day's experiences into wisdom. Each moment of conscious breathing, each gentle return to presence, each act of mindful listening becomes a thread in the tapestry of a life aligned with truth. The tranquil heart is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of an unshakable center that remains peaceful regardless of the storms without. In this final teaching, may you discover that the peace you seek has always been your nature, waiting patiently for desire to find its way home to truth. Islamic philosophy teaches that the search for truth is endless yet soothing. In this final moment of our journey together, let us rest in this profound understanding that the very act of seeking becomes a source of peace itself. The great thinkers we have encountered, from al-Kindi pondering the nature of being, to Ibn Sina contemplating the harmony between reason and revelation, to al-Ghazali balancing intellectual rigor with spiritual wisdom, all shared this beautiful paradox, that the more we discover, the more wonder opens before us like an infinite horizon. Consider how this reflects the gentle rhythm of inquiry itself. Just as the ocean's waves continuously yet peacefully touch the shore, philosophical questioning creates its own meditative cadence. Each question answered births new wonder. Each insight deepened invites further exploration. This is not restlessness. It is the soul's natural movement toward understanding. Ibn Rushd, known to the Western world as Averroes, spoke of this as the intellect's eternal hunger, but he meant this hunger not as desperation, but as the graceful overflow of consciousness encountering the infinite depth of existence. And so we arrive at a revolutionary truth. In our rapidly spinning world, slowness itself becomes the most profound act of resistance. While society rushes toward answers, Islamic philosophy whispers the wisdom of patient contemplation. It teaches us that wonder sustains the human spirit not despite its endlessness, but because of it. When we embrace the infinite nature of knowledge, we free ourselves from the anxiety of having to arrive, of being complete, of knowing it all. Instead, we can rest in the beautiful journey itself, like stars that find peace in knowing they will never stop shining. In your daily life, this philosophy offers a gentle revolution. When social media demands instant opinions, remember al-Farabi's patient cultivation of wisdom. When productivity culture measures worth by output, recall how Islamic scholars valued the depth of understanding over the breadth of achievement. Let curiosity become your meditation, questions your prayer, and wonder your resting place. You need not know everything to be complete. You need only remain open to the infinite tapestry of existence, woven by divine wisdom and human insight across generations. And so our journey ends where it began, with the recognition that truth is not a destination, but a way of traveling. The light of wisdom we have explored together continues to shine, not because it illuminates all darkness, but because it teaches us to find beauty in the gentle act of seeking itself. Rest now in this eternal horizon, where every ending becomes a new beginning, and every question a doorway to deeper peace.